Let's begin by all joining together in praying. Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, for you are our rock, you are our Redeemer. Amen. Have you been noticing how much attention is going to the topic of family lately? There's some really big questions that are out there, and people from all different parts of life are starting to get into it. Big questions like, what exactly is family? Who gets to decide what family is? What should a family look like? Now, legally, with tax implications on the line, you're going to find people talking about that. People like judges and lawyers and certainly politicians lately, people in that area of the world. We're hearing a lot about family. I think it's pretty interesting more broadly and maybe a completely different context of people. You can find people talking about the roles of family. Questions that have been asked, I think, for decades, and the roles maybe have changed and been shaped a little bit. But today, you can go back home. If you're on Instagram, you can look at Instagram, type in trad wife, and you are going to see tons and tons of results of now people living traditional wife values. Or you go on Twitter or whatever Twitter is now, and you can find lots of posts about men and what it means to be a man, that you work out and have lots of muscles, that you dominate women, actually, that you kind of stay away from the home life because that's not your place to be anymore. It's really interesting, right? Across politics and news and social media and even courtrooms, family is something people really want to get into today. I don't think it's surprising, though, that family is something people want to focus on. I think family really is such a huge part of our life that it is just in about every part of life. I didn't try to make a count scrolling through our streaming services at home because I think you could make an argument that almost every movie, every TV show is really centered around family. It's not just the 10 or 11 movies about people driving really fast and furious in cars with family at the center of it. It's not just the 16th century British royalty people who are part of the upper class, who's marrying who gets the estate. No, family is really at the center of a lot of entertainment today. Who's marrying who? Who's defending who? Who's together? Think about your work now, too. Now it's not just work, but now you've got a work family. Your work brothers and sisters, your bosses who tell you, treat this like a family. This is your family here. You've got friendships now that are developing and kind of taking on the roles of family a little bit, too. Around Thanksgiving time, usually when blood relative family people get together, now the last few years, there's Friendsgiving, where people don't be with blood relatives because it's tricky and hard, instead with friends who only get together with friends. A focus on family and what family is and what family should be. I think it's interesting because now in our world and our time, there are some open questions about what that should look like. That's why we as a church are going to do this sermon series and this topic of family. Because I think we need to get a bigger perspective than just here and now. I think we need to know what God has to say about family and what it looks like and how it works. I think we're going to need his encouragement to live out the kind of roles that God calls us to live. And I think in the end of all this, we're going to see that when it comes to Christians and family, it really does need to be something that is talked about and worked through and encouraged, because when it comes to family, God's simple truth for us is this: we got to be all in on family. If you're here, I'm guessing this won't be a surprise, but maybe to some of you, this is a little bit new. Have you ever heard the term church family? right? I think I maybe have already said it this morning. It's a way that Christians have been thinking about what a church gathering is and should be and does. Do you know where the idea of church family comes from, though? It's way before any of this ever happened. The truth is, the concept of a church family goes back to when church really just was family. Do you know the story of the guy who was once named Jacob and then his name got turned into Israel? Well, he's the one that had the 12 sons. And then those 12 sons had more kids and more kids and more kids and more kids until it turned into millions of people, the nation of the Israelites, God's Old Testament people. And as they're heading back up out of Egypt, kind of up into the promised land, God said, this family is who you are going to be. This is what your life is going to look like. This is how you're going to worship. This is how you're going to do life together. And even though it might have been like distant cousins of cousins of cousins, kind of God's Old Testament family really was mostly blood relatives. And all of them with really clear boundaries about what life as a family was supposed to look like. But then, about 1,500 years later, then church family changed. Something happened that opened up church family to become different. The writer to the Hebrews tells us and them about what this huge family shift was going to look like. He says, therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened for us through the curtain, that is his body, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience, having our bodies washed with pure water. Now it was not just going to be blood relatives. Now it was not just going to be specific things with specific in-between people, us and God. Now the church family was going to be different, because it became so much more than just doing the things that the Israelites had been doing. Now people, all people, could be at one with God because of Jesus. That big change did not come without issues and struggles, though. That big of a change from Israel to everybody connected to Jesus, it led to a lot of problems. Where even people like Peter, who had been face to face with Jesus, one of his closest disciples for years, Peter starts messing it up. And he starts focusing too much on the traditions and the rules that no longer applied in their church family relationship. It took years of God helping them see that a church family needed to be one that was just made through Jesus and what Jesus had done alone, so that by the time this letter gets written today, Christians had come out the other side of these conflicts about what a church family should look like. How that they needed to be united on the idea that what Jesus had done for them was so much better for any of these rituals and rules and traditions about what they could do for God. It was only Jesus, and in Jesus, they would find unity. Do you think that's a little bit idealistic, though? Because I want to ask, what is your honest idea and opinion of what a church family looks like and acts like and is like? I think we can be honest that for many people today, the idea of church and a church family where people are actually all in and gathering together isn't a positive one. For many, it can feel like a place where you need to put on the face and the show and cover up all the flaws and the issues, because if you don't, then the people sitting next to you and across from you, then they're going to find out, and then the gossip goes from one person to the next person to the next person until you hear people are talking about you. Christians can often talk about how they are part of a church family with other people in their church family, but then in reality, it's just that hour on Sunday where people sit together in the same room, where maybe they smile at each other and say the nice hi when people are walking in, but real and deep relationships where we actually get to know each other, well, those things are hard, so maybe they don't happen so much. And the hard truth is, for you and I who are here gathering around trying to be a church family, you and I can easily be the reason that people don't see a church family for what God says it should look like. We can be the reason that people see a messed up place with messed up people with lots of divisions. But thank God, sometimes God does pretty amazing things, doesn't he? I can remember one of the times that I've gotten to experience when Joanna and I lived in East Asia. We got to see God at work in building a church family. Our lives there were a little bit more simple and clear and just centered around making friends and building relationships and just telling people about Jesus. There was one family we got really, really close with. It was a mom and a dad and a little 2-year-old kid who thankfully his language abilities were about on the same level of my language abilities, so we had lots of fun conversations together. But with this family, we went out for food all the time. We studied the Bible every week or twice a week for a big part of the year. We laughed and we cried and we did life together, and we got really, really close. Until the night when we were supposed to come back to the States and live back here, where the little 2-year-old loved us so much that he sat in our duffel bag and said, "I'm coming home with you, take me with you." And we listened as he wailed all the way down the 6 or 7 flights of stairs, and wailed as they got on their little electric scooter and drove down the road away from us. And it was hard, and it was sad, and it was a memorable night, but it changed for us when, after they got back home, we had a new text pop up in our group chat, totally new thing, and the husband, Isaac, labeled up on top in that language, "We are family." For people who had to leave and who were gonna be in a different place, probably never seeing these people face to face ever again, this meant a lot to us. That we would be family with them forever. We went from strangers to dear friends who came together kind of by accident, but then by choice. We got to family level unity with Isaac and Sharon and Momo, and all the cultural differences and language issues could not stop us from growing together. We had something that centered us and united us and got past all of that, so that on our last night there, we could say, we're family. Because I think you and I know this, that there is just one thing that unites us, and that will unite us, just like it united those first groups of people who decided it was going to be worth it to go all in for each other. There's one thing in this world that forms all of us into a family, despite differences and challenges and struggles. At the center of our church family has to be the good news of Jesus and what Jesus has done for us. And with that at the center, God shapes us to be the kind of family who chooses to be all in for each other. We're going to be a family that holds on to what God says because God will keep his promises in Jesus. We're a family that the writer tells us has real hope, that this isn't just an hour-long thing or a little part of life. This is something that is part of our entire lives. The writer continued, "Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful." We're a family that does want to help each other live as family. We look to each other for help and encouragement because to reflect what Jesus has done for us is a big part of who we are. He says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, trying to show each other Jesus." We're a family that is going to help each other see that this world, this life, is not going to be it. that even the best things here cannot compare to how amazing heaven is going to be, because it's perfect and just better. And we'll do it like this weekly. We will do it the day after this daily and hourly, because with Jesus at the center of who we are, we can't help but try to encourage each other towards that. The writer finishes, let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. In Jesus and this forgiveness and love that God has for us in Jesus, God is building and shaping us into a family with that at the center, to be the kind of family that is going to be all in for each other. What is that family going to look like? People who are holding on to hope. People encouraging each other to love God and others better. People taking the time and the effort to support and point each other back to the cross when we need that. People who are all in for each other and for church. I think a big part of what that has to look like for us is this: simply unhurried time together for each other. Church family isn't something we fit into our busy lives and schedule in. Church family is something we shape all our lives around. Because the more that we're together and the more unhurried time we spend together, the more we talk to each other. And the more that we talk to each other, the more we get to know each other on a real and deeper level. Time together means conversations. Conversations means real friendships develop. And once we have real friendships, we start to open up and be vulnerable and honest with each other. And through all of it, as we're vulnerable and honest, we encourage each other with Jesus and remind each other that we're forgiven in Jesus. And we come back together, even when there are differences, in the unity that we are one in Jesus. Before I finish talking about how we need to be all in today as a church family, I think I want to address 3 different groups of people that are kind of part of our church family today. Because being all in for you and for you and for you, I think is going to look a little bit different depending on who you are. And let's start off with the long-time Ascension people. For you who have been here maybe since the very beginning, or for a big part of the beginning, and this is where you've been. This is where you and your family have called your church home. This is where people in your family have grown up, from the little kids to now be adults. Maybe not exactly here, literally in this building, right? Because you're the kind of people that remember the last storefront and the storefront before that, and what it was like to worship on the base chapel, and what it was like before there was this big thing going on. You people have perspective. You understand what it was like and the ways that God has blessed us to get where we are today. So for you to be all in on church, you need to know that God is going to use you to give the rest of us perspective that we need to have. Your leadership and your service is going to be the example for everybody else in this church, because you've been around. You get to help set the tone and the culture for our church family, because this is who you've been. This has been your church family for a long time. For the newer people and families here, if you've been with us for a few years, I think, or months, or even just a couple weeks, good news for you: to be all in, there is no requirement of time before you can start getting into church family life. You people get after it today. Make it a goal to know everybody's name and maybe even a little bit more about them. You today be the first person that goes up to the visitors, because you know what it was like to be that first-time visitor not too long ago. To come into a place where you knew nobody, you initiate that conversation today. But don't let it stop with just today. You ask for their phone number. You take them out for coffee and food later on this week. Even if you're only here for a few months or years as you're rotating through, you can make this your family by taking the first step and starting to build relationships. And then finally, first-timers, People that we maybe haven't met yet in person that are just joining us online, keep coming. Because the truth is, it is going to take more than 1 week to get to know us and what is at the center of our church and how that shows itself in how we live. And we do want to get to know you better. We do need your feedback and your thoughts about how we can best do church here and serve this community. We really are excited and thankful that you're here, and that is not going to change from the very first time that you walk through these doors to the 100th or the 1000th time that you're here. We want you here. We need you here, and we mean that. So no matter who you are, it is time to be all in on our church family. Because with Jesus at the center of who we are and what we do, God will work through it. God will make sure it's worth it. Amen.